I'm Lysander Hawthorne, though most people just call me LYSS. I've always been the quiet one, the guy who blends into background while my older brother, Cashin, takes center stage. He's the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately commands attention. Charismatic, confident, the golden boy everyone loves. Me, I'm more comfortable with books than people, especially the old, dusty ones filled with stories no one else seems to care about anymore. Growing up in Salem, Massachusetts, wasn't exactly ordinary. Our house wasn't just a home, it was more like a museum. My dad, Edgar Hawthorne, wasn't your typical rich guy. He was obsessed with uncovering artifacts tied to America's earliest days. His study was a labyrinth of shelves crammed with relics, journals, maps, and strange objects he collected over the years. Dad always said I had his mind for puzzles, but it never felt like much of a compliment when Cashin got all the praise. Dad had this way of making you feel special. Without saying much, he'd hand me an old map or a journal and say, "Oh, YSS, see if you can figure this out." And I would. I'd spend hours piecing together clues, decoding symbols, unraveling riddles. It was our thing, something that bonded us in a way Cashin never understood or cared to. But now Dad was gone, and I couldn't help but wonder if he'd left any part of himself behind for me. When we gathered at the lawyer's office 6 months after his death, I held on to hope. Maybe he'd left me something meaningful, something that would show he saw me, even if no one else did. But as the solicitor read through the will, that hope turned to ash in my throat. Cashin got everything: the estate, the collection, the offshore accounts, even Dad's prize safe deposit box. All I got was a cryptic note scrawled in Dad's handwriting. "Seek what cannot be seen, and you shall find your true inheritance." At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. What couldn't be seen? Was this Dad's way of telling me I'd inherited nothing but air? But as I stared at those words, something inside me stirred. A spark of defiance, maybe, or just plain stubbornness. If Cashin thought he could take everything and leave me with scraps, he was wrong. I wasn't going to let him win that easily. The lawyer's office smelled like polished wood and regret. Cashin sat across from me, his expensive leather shoes tapping impatiently against the hardwood floor. I tried not to fidget in my seat, but every word out of the solicitor's mouth made my stomach sink lower and lower. By the time they finished reading the will, I was gripping the arms of my chair so hard my knuckles turned white. Cashin didn't even glance at me when the solicitor announced that he'd inherited nearly everything: the house, the collection, the offshore accounts. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, a smug grin spreading across his face like he'd already won. When we were alone afterward, I confronted him. "You really think this is fair?" I snapped, shoving the note Dad left me into his hands. He gave me nothing but this stupid riddle. What am I supposed to do with that? Cashin barely spared the note a glance. "You wouldn't understand, OYSS," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Dad knew you'd never appreciate what he built. You're better off staying out of my way." His words stung, but they also lit a fire in me. If Cashin thought I'd just walk away and let him have everything, he didn't know me at all. That night, I went home and stared at the note again. Seek what cannot be seen. It wasn't just a riddle, it was a challenge, and I was determined to solve it. For days, I pored over that note, trying to decipher its meaning. The phrase, "what cannot be seen," gnawed at me until I remembered something Dad used to do when I was a kid. He'd write secret messages in invisible ink on the pages of his journals, only visible under ultraviolet light. Rummaging through the attic, I found an old UV flashlight Dad kept in a toolbox. I took it to his private library, scanning the spines of his books until I found what I was looking for: a leather-bound volume titled Chronicles of Albion. Sure enough, faint markings appeared under the light, scribbled along the margins. They were coordinates, pointing to a location near Stonehenge. Beneath them was another cryptic line: "Where shadows fall longest, seek the key." My heart raced. This wasn't just a random scavenger hunt. It was Dad's way of testing me. If Cashin wanted to keep everything, fine. But I wasn't going to let him take what I was starting to realize might be the real treasure. The next morning, I drove to Salisbury Plain, the coordinates leading me to a secluded grove near Stonehenge. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. I spotted a patch of disturbed earth beneath one of the standing stones. Digging with my hands, I uncovered a small metal box containing a rusted iron key and a map marked with several locations across Europe. Each site corresponded to places Dad visited during his artifact hunting expeditions. I realized this was more than just a puzzle. It was a journey, one designed to lead me to something valuable enough to level the playing field against Cashin. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Word travels fast in small towns, and it didn't take long for Cashin to hear about my trip to Stonehenge. He showed up unannounced at my rented apartment in Boston, barging in like he owned the place. "What are you up to, LYSS?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "You think you can just waltz in and steal my inheritance piece by piece?" "I'm not stealing anything," I shot back, refusing to back down. "I'm following Dad's instructions. Maybe you should try doing the same instead of hoarding everything for yourself." Our argument ended bitterly, with Cashin warning me to stay out of his way, or face consequences. But his threats only fueled my determination. If he thought he could intimidate me, he was dead wrong. I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I reached out to someone who might understand Dad's obsession. Dr. Lowen Price, a historian who'd worked with him years ago. She agreed to help, intrigued by the possibility of uncovering long-lost relics. Together, we decoded the next clue on the map, which pointed to a ruined monastery in Provence, France. Meanwhile, Cashin hired a private investigator named Victor Kane to monitor my movements. Victor's reports revealed that I was closing in on something significant, but what exactly remained unclear. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In Provence, Aloan and I explored the crumbling monastery, guided by symbols etched into the stone walls. We discovered a hidden chamber containing a chest filled with gold coins, medieval jewelry, and documents detailing Dad's dealings with black market collectors. Aloan warned me about the dangers of handling such items without proper legal channels, but I insisted this was my chance to reclaim what I deserved. I sold off some of the smaller pieces discreetly, using the funds to fund further investigations. As I juggled my dual existence, one as a struggling historian and the other as a cunning treasure hunter, I became increasingly paranoid. Cashin grew more suspicious of my sudden financial independence and tightened his grip on the family estate, cutting off access to shared resources. Victor Kane closed in on me, tracking my every move while reporting back to Cashin. Tensions escalated when Victor attempted to intercept one of my shipments, leading to a tense standoff. Just as I deciphered the next clue, a reference to a sunken ship off the coast of Sicily, I discovered a shocking betrayal. Dr. Aloan Price had been secretly working with Cashin all along, feeding him information in exchange for a cut of the profits. Heartbroken but undeterred, I resolved to continue alone. I realized that trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. The last clue led me to Edinburgh, Scotland, where I had to navigate the labyrinthine catacombs beneath the city. There, I uncovered Dad's greatest secret, a journal detailing the existence of a legendary artifact known as the Scepter of Albion, said to grant its bearer immense influence over Britain's elite circles. But retrieving the scepter wouldn't be easy. It was guarded by traps and protected by powerful forces still loyal to Dad's memory. The catacombs beneath Edinburgh were colder than I expected, the damp air biting at my skin as I descended deeper into the earth. My flashlight flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows on the walls that seemed to twist and writhe like living things. Every step echoed ominously, a reminder how alone I was, and how dangerous this place could be. Dad's journal guided me through the labyrinth, its cryptic notes pointing out symbols carved into the stone walls. Each symbol felt like a breadcrumb leading me closer to truth or to my doom. The further I went, the more I wondered if I had made a mistake. What if this wasn't about reclaiming my legacy? What if it was just another way for Dad to test me, to see if I had the guts to follow through? But then I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing behind me. Someone was down here with me. My heart pounded as I quickened my pace, clutching the journal tighter. I didn't need to guess who it was. Cashin had found me. The sound grew louder, closer, until I could hear his voice barking orders to his men. "Find him. He can't have gone far." I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay hidden, but the beam of a flashlight swept past me, narrowly missing my face. I had no choice but to run, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I darted down a narrow passage. I finally reached a dead end, my chest heaving as I scanned the wall for any sign of a hidden door or mechanism. Then I saw it, a spiral rune etched into stone. I pressed it firmly, and a section of the wall slid open with a grinding sound. I slipped inside, pulling the makeshift door shut behind me just as I heard Cashin's voice shouting my name. Inside the hidden passage, I moved as quickly as I could, my flashlight revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped downward. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if the catacombs themselves were resisting my presence. At the end of the tunnel, I found myself in a cavernous chamber illuminated by flickering torchlight. And there, resting on a pedestal in the center of the room, was the scepter of Albion. It gleamed faintly, its golden surface engraved with intricate designs that seemed to pulse with energy. For a moment, I forgot everything else, the betrayal, the danger, the years of resentment, and just stared at it. This was what Dad had been protecting all along. But before I could take another step, a voice rang out from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. Dr. Eloan Price stepped forward, her silhouette sharp against the torchlight. She held a pistol loosely in her hand, its barrel pointed at the ground but ready to rise at a moment's notice. "Eloan," I stammered, my voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" "I told you," she said, her tone icy. "This isn't something you can just take. LYSS. Your father entrusted me with guarding it after he realized how dangerous it was. Do you even know what the scepter represents? The power it holds." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but deep down, I knew she was right. The scepter wasn't just an artifact. It was a weapon, capable of influencing people, bending them to its will. That's why Dad had hidden it away, why it left clues only someone worthy could follow. Before I could respond, Cashin burst into the chamber, flanked by two burly men armed to the teeth. His eyes locked onto the scepter, greed flashing across his face. "Step aside, LYSS," he growled. "This doesn't belong to you." "No," I said, standing my ground. "It doesn't belong to either of us." Eloan raised her gun, aiming it squarely at Cashin. "Touch it and I'll shoot," she warned, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around us. Cashin sneered. "You think you can stop me? You're just a pawn in this game. Eloan. Always have been." That struck a nerve. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but before anyone could make a move, the ground beneath us trembled. The pedestal began to sink into the floor, triggering some kind of ancient mechanism. Runes carved into the walls lit up, glowing bright blue as the air grew heavy with static electricity. "What did you do?" Cashin shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "I didn't do anything." I snapped, backing away from the pedestal. Whatever was happening, it wasn't part of Dad's plan. We'd triggered something far bigger than any of us had anticipated. The tension in the room was suffocating. Cashin took a step toward the pedestal, his hand reaching for the scepter, but Eloan fired a warning shot, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't," she said, her voice cold. "You don't understand what this thing is capable of." Cashin ignored her, lunging for the scepter. I tackled him to ground, pinning him beneath me as the tremors grew stronger. Chunks of rock fell from the ceiling, and the runes pulsed brighter, their glow almost blinding. "Let me go." Cashin snarled, struggling against my grip. "No." I yelled back. "If you take it, we're all dead." For a split second, our eyes met, and I saw something in his expression that surprised me. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Maybe he wasn't as invincible as he pretended to be. With a final surge of determination, I grabbed the scepter and hurled it against the stone floor. It shattered into pieces, the glow fading instantly as the tremor subsided. The chamber stabilized, but the damage was done. The scepter was gone, for good. Eloan lowered her gun, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to destroy it," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," I replied, my voice firm. "Some things are too dangerous to exist." Cashin stared at me, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. For once, he didn't have a comeback. We barely made out alive. The entrance to the catacombs collapsed behind us as we scrambled toward the surface, coughing and covered in dust. When we finally emerged into the cold night air, none of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. Cashin glared at me, his jaw clenched tight, but there was something else in his gaze, grudging respect maybe, or guilt. I didn't care. All I cared about was surviving. Eloan disappeared into the darkness without a word, leaving me alone with my brother under the starless sky. For the first time in years, we stood side by side without fighting, united by exhaustion and the weight of what we just endured. Back in Salem, I tried to piece together the fragments of my life. Losing the scepter should have felt like failure, but instead, it felt like freedom. I realized I didn't need some magical artifact to prove my worth. What mattered was how I chose to move forward. Cashin and I didn't talk much after that night, but the tension between us softened. He stopped treating me like a rival and started acting more like a brother. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. To my surprise, Eloan reached out a few weeks later. She apologized for betraying me, explaining that she'd been desperate to protect the scepter and herself from people who would misuse its power. Though I wasn't ready to forgive her completely, I appreciated her honesty. Together, we decided to establish a foundation dedicated to preserving cultural heritage, ensuring that Dad's work continued in a meaningful way. One evening, Cashin showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot as he stood in my doorway. "We need to talk," he said, his voice unusually quiet. For once, I listened. Over coffee, Cashin admitted he'd been wrong about a lot of things, including me. He offered to share control of the estate, splitting profits equally for the first time. It wasn't charity. It was an olive branch. And for the first time in years, I accepted it. Standing on the cliffs overlooking Salem, I held Dad's journal in my hands. Its pages were worn, the ink faded, but the words still resonated deeply. I smiled, knowing I'd finally found what couldn't be seen. The courage to forge my own path and the strength to rise above bitterness. Just when I thought the story was over, I received a package containing a fragment of the shattered scepter. Attached was a note from Eloan. "Some legacies are meant to endure, no matter how broken they seem." Had the scepter's power truly been destroyed, or was this just the beginning of something new? I kept the fragment as a reminder, not of greed or ambition, but of the choices I'd made along the way. Life isn't about finding treasure. It's about deciding what's worth keeping. As I walked toward the horizon, the ocean stretching endlessly before me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Whatever came next, I was ready.